Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I'm your host for tonight, Jeremiah Preisser. I want to welcome you in. Before I start things off, I want to let you know that we are brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation, run by Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. They do a good job over there. They're helping guys get money. You know, there's no 401ks in this business. Somebody's got to do something to help them out, and there are a few people you can talk to if you want to pitch in. We're also brought to you by, I'm not even sure, Seat Giant. Yeah, if you want to buy tickets to a fight, go there, get something. But you got to go to the website. You got to click the banner. We get a little back, and we'd appreciate it. We're also brought to you by some betting site that I can't seem to remember right now, so I don't really care. Anyways, you know, it's not like they're paying the bills that much anyway, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Anyways, thank you for listening in. I appreciate anybody and everybody who listens to me talk about boxing, you know, whether it's just me by myself or, you know, Mike Goodpasture with me or, you know, some of the many guests that we've had on here, you know, like Hamed and, you know, John Responti, John Einrenhoff, obviously, who's been doing it for many years. Regardless, let's get right into the meat and potatoes of the controversy tonight. And that is obviously, and it's funny because I've heard some people say, hey, are you going to spend the same kind of energy on this topic as you did with Canelo Alvarez? And I am. I mean, to me, you know, none of us are completely objective. We all know that. But I try my best to be as objective as I possibly can. And so I'm going to spend some minutes on this topic, just as I did on the Canelo Alvarez one. And obviously, anybody who's followed the boxing news for today knows that Vasily Lomachenko is now the WBC's quote-unquote franchise champion. Now, I had heard this news break even before it was official. Dan Raphael had tweeted something out that that's what he heard. That's what Dave Moretti of Top Rank, Carl Moretti, I believe. Maybe I'm fucking that name up too. Oh, well. Anyways, I'm a little tired. Forgive me. But yeah, the point is that Vasily Lomachenko is now the WBC quote-unquote franchise champion, and he's gotten an elevated status. And, you know, what does the boxing world make of this? And it's, as so many other things in this sport, there's a lot of tribal interest being played out, right? Devin Haney, because of this designation, this special designation that Lomachenko has garnered, there's a lot of tribal hate going on. You know, the people who jump on the, you know, Gervonta Davis and Devin Haney bandwagons, acting as if these are some sort of boogeymen. And don't get me wrong, they may be boogeymen of the division. Maybe that will turn out to be the case. But there's just, it's saying that a guy like Vasily Lomachenko is afraid of any of these guys, in my opinion, is frankly absurd. And I just dismiss these ideas outright. I mean, I did a show by myself talking about how the guys who've proven the most, guys like Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin, Vasily Lomachenko, all these guys somehow get the microscope on them, and they should, right? Guys who are at the top are always going to get more play than guys near the bottom. And I'm not even talking about guys near the bottom of the box rec rankings, right? Nobody's going to page 25 or whatever it is, the middleweight rankings, and saying, hey, who's Miguel Julio Gonzalez fighting? Nobody cares. What I'm getting at is the guys who are even at the bottom of the top 10. Hell, a lot of top 5 guys barely even get any play, you know, in all these divisions. I mean, how often do you hear people talking about David Lemieux or any of these other guys? I mean, by and large, the spotlight is shown on the cream of the crop of boxing. That's the way it works in most sports. That's fine. I mean, you know, follow the NBA. LeBron James is getting an overwhelming amount of attention, and he will continue to do so. I'm not faulting people for doing that. What I am faulting people for, and of course this is not everybody, but I'm faulting people for, again, the guys who have proven the most somehow are also the biggest ducks. They're scared, this and that. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, you can't, Devin Haney, as talented as he looks, you can't say, hey, he beat Abdullayev, and now all of a sudden Lomachenko is ducking him, when we all know, or we all should know, that Lomachenko is clearly targeting the winner of Richard Comey versus Teofimo Lopez. We all know that. We know that's the end game, right? Lomachenko, to his credit, recognizes that he's not physically equipped to be at 135 for the long haul. He realizes that it's not his natural class, but given that, he's still trying to unify the division, whatever that means now. I didn't really take unifications as being that important to begin with, but it's funny because as you've had more and more titles, more and more people have focused on the unifying factor and being quote-unquote undisputed, which, again, a title that doesn't mean a whole lot to me either. When Terrence Crawford became the man at 135 and 140, beating all these other guys, whether they held titles or not, was irrelevant to me. But the undisputed title has become significant for many others. And now with these designations by the WBC, a lot of people are, the most hardcore fans are left wondering, what the hell does it mean? I mean, Lomachenko and Alvarez, what, they don't have mandatories anymore? I mean, essentially what this does is this tag gives them the freedom to pretty much do what they like without repercussion. I mean, if Lomachenko and Alvarez want to jump up a division, jump down a division, whatever it may be, they have the freedom to do so without worrying about being stripped, because it's not a real title. It's a tag. It's not a real title. And so does this now mean that Lomachenko is not, he's not the WBC's guy? Again, it's all pretty confusing. There's not a lot of clarity surrounding the issue, and maybe it's my ignorance. I mean, it could be the fact that I don't pay attention to what the WBC is saying, because I don't give a shit what the WBC says. I mean, I'm just this is the news that I heard, and I interpret it as I feel. And it's, it might behoove me to look at the data and say, oh, well, Mauricio Sulaiman is saying this. But the reason I don't really give a shit what Sulaiman says, or really about the alphabet trinket soups at all, is because it's all political elbow rubbing. We've talked about this time and time again on one of the Inside Boxing dailies. It's just wash, rinse, and repeat for us. Over and over again, we talk about this stuff, how these are political trophies. Lomachenko is one of the few guys in the sport who's respectful. He seems to want to fight everybody. He's shown no, he doesn't seem like he's swerving anybody at all. I know there's accusations already that he's avoiding Devin Haney. Obviously that stuff is much too premature to give it any substance. But that, again, Lomachenko is one of those guys who carries himself well. He fights just about anybody. So he doesn't deserve a lot of flack for what the WBC is doing, because it wasn't his choice. He didn't ask the WBC, so far as I'm aware, to create him some franchise tag. So I don't put the blame on him. I put the blame on the Alphabet Soup organizations. And thankfully, guys like Mike Coppinger, Dan Raphael, Cliff Rold, and many, many others are bashing the WBC for what they did. Deservedly so. The WBC just makes everything more confusing, and it's to the point now, and it was to the point before, honestly, trying to explain this sport and who a title holder is and who a champion is, and making those distinctions. And then, if you really wanted to get into the web of stuff, the interims and the franchises and the silvers and the this and the that, the champions in recess, whatever it may be, it's a bit like explaining quantum physics to a 10-year-old. The sport has gotten so damn confusing, because think about it on the surface level, about how There's 17 weight divisions. There's 4 major titles per weight division. That brings a total to 68. Plus you've got the ring. Plus you have, lineal or linear, right? There's a distinction there, too, that a lot of people don't make. But there is a distinction between linear and lineal. Right? Linear is when the number 1 and number 2 guys fight each other, and that creates a new line. That's a linear champion. And then the lineal is the continued passing of the line. And, you just equate all of those factors in, and it's heavy. I mean, a lot of us suck at math, but for, some of us can still hang on, albeit thinly, to whatever the hell's going on in boxing. And it sucks because what does it mean for a lot of people? Okay, what if Lomachenko gets the winner of Comey Lopez, and let's say he wins? Well, he's not the quote-unquote undisputed champion because Devin Haney holds the full status belt or whatever the hell you call it. I mean, it's all just a load of bullshit in my opinion. Listen, this is why I simplify it all. This is why I'm a part of the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board, because they don't bother with all of the alphabet soup nonsense. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, we should all recognize it at this point. Transnational, it doesn't bother with that stuff. The number 1 and number 2 guys have to fight each other. It's not the Ring either. I mean, the Ring magazine, I see them getting a lot of flack, and they do deserve some, but by and large, they do a good job. Look at their rankings. They're rock solid. I'm a part of the Transnational Rankings Board, but I also look at the Rings because I have respect for what they do. I know guys on the Rankings Board. They're good people. And when you're trying to get a general feeling about what's going on in the boxing world and who's where, they do a good job. And so, to me, what I was going to say is, unlike the Ring, we don't do that number 1, number 3 stuff. And I don't think number 1 and number 3 should ever be the setup that creates a new champion, unless there's some sort of rare circumstances that warrant it. Again, let's say Errol Spence was number 2, and Terrence Crawford or Manny Pacquiao were number 1, or let's say Crawford was number 1, Spence was number 2, and Pacquiao was number 3. Spence got in a car accident. Let's say his injuries are more serious than they're alleged to be, and he's going to be out for a year and a half. And, they want to have the number 1 and number 3 guys crown a champion. I'm okay with that. But it would have to be some circumstance like that for a justification. But other than that, it's transnational is just 1 and number 2, and that's that. And that's the reason I stick to that model. And it's funny because with Tyson Fury's ascension and Top Rank's bullshit marketing, and I don't say that because I'm not saying that you cannot claim Tyson Fury as the lineal champion. I don't care if you do. I don't care if you don't. But a lot of people have kind of risen up and given a lot of flack to the idea that he's lineal champion. And it doesn't bother me either way. It doesn't bother me either way, whether you think he is, whether you think he isn't, because I like the fact that it's even in the spotlight. It's been many years since this much weight has been given to the lineal championship. And again, whether you buy it or not, it doesn't matter. I just like the fact that it's being talked about because there is history there. And the reason why I think it's valuable is because having the number 1 and number 2 guys fight each other, or the man beating the man, it's a closer representation to what other sports are doing. And that should be how it is. That's the sort of sport we should have. We should have a more of what is a meritocracy. You earn your way up and you get the fight you deserve in a timely fashion. But of course, I also have to say is, as much as I like the lineal championship and its history and whatnot, I don't ride or die with it. I just like it better than the alphabet soup nonsense. I like it better than the Rings championship policy. And the reason even the lineal championship is number 2, in my opinion, is because it's not doing what it should do. And the lineal championship, it's not a real physical belt. You can't mandate guys to fight. That kills it a bit, in my opinion, right? I mean, look at what Adonis Stevenson did at light heavyweight. He was able to milk it for, half a decade by fighting just about no one of real note. You shouldn't be able to do that. You should have to fight your best available opposition. You should have to fight the number 1 guy in your division every year. So until, again, it all comes in second place to a good governing body where there's 1 champion per weight class, less weight classes, number 1 guy gets his shot every year, just like they do in other sports. Okay? You can look in football, at the end of the year, you're going to get the 2 best teams in the league playing one another. Same thing with the NBA, same thing with baseball, etc., etc. That is the route boxing needs to go. I mean, and this is why I don't get too upset with the current absurdity that is the alphabet soup organizations, because I don't like it. That is clear. Anybody who's listened to the shows in the past knows that none of us on this show like all this alphabet soup nonsense. But it's gotten to the point. Where I hope it keeps going. And Bob Arum, to his credit, has even said this as well, is that he hopes that the alphabet soup organizations just keep churning out champion after champion. Just make as many as you possibly can. Participation, he didn't say this, these are my words, create participation medals, participation belts, hell, interim participation belts. I don't give a shit. Just keep putting them out so it gets to the point where there's government intervention. And I know a lot of people think that idea is folly. It's not going to happen. But the U.S. government has gotten involved in sports before. When Major League Baseball was going through its steroid scandal, they got involved. And boxing is clearly in a worse sport than Major League Baseball ever was. And again, I don't want to get political. So don't take this as some sort of endorsement for Trump or anybody else. I don't talk politics on the boxing shows. And, if they come up, I try to, I don't try to make any concrete statements because I don't want to get into all that stuff. The politics is too... I just don't like the state of things anymore, and picking one side or the other is just it's just, I mean, it can have you barred from friends and family, and I just don't understand it. Anyways, Trump, to his credit, is and has long been a big boxing fan. Would he look in boxing's way if it was getting too absurd? I don't know. I don't know. Would the next president, if Trump doesn't win re-election, would the next president? I don't know. But if Trump wins re-election, again, I'm not endorsing either way. What I'm saying is he's a big boxing fan. He's been involved in the game. Would he be willing to do something? I know a lot of people wouldn't want him to run the sport, and that's okay. Maybe you could set up an independent commission. Maybe they can get the ball rolling that way. I don't really care. I don't look at any of these guys as my savior, as my guy. All I care about is getting the sport in a better place, and we can do a lot more of that. Thankfully, social media has it's become a microphone to the world, and seeing all the fans get on Twitter, voice their dissent at a lot of these decisions. It's I don't want to call it inspiring because it doesn't feel as if the alphabet organizations are really feeling any pressure to change their ways, but it is nice to see all the people being able to get your ideas out in the out in social media. It allows you to connect with people. They're exposed to different opinions, and I think it's been an enlightening experience for a lot of people. It has for me. Twitter, Twitter's a little I'm not in love with Twitter. I prefer Facebook just because the conversation is more long form. You can really have good conversations on Twitter if you want, or Facebook if you want. Twitter, with the character limit, it's a bit different, but it doesn't matter. Twitter is the water cooler of social media, and there's a lot of smart people on there saying some really interesting things, and our ability to connect faster means that information can travel faster, more people are exposed to it, and you can get some people on the same page. And it's nice to see a lot of people getting fed up with this stuff. But of course, there's a downside too, because Dan Raphael, for instance, will say, hey, the WBC is becoming more of a joke than the WBA. And yet Dan Raphael, if you look at his schedule, he'll go and put, a WBC, interim title belt, in his schedule, which should mean absolutely nothing. That's why I erase all that stuff out of my schedules. But it's just one of those things where he'll bitch about the alphabet soup organizations, and then he'll lend some weight to what they're doing in his schedule and in some of his writings. And it's just, to me, it's just, you're not really helping yourself that much if you're doing those two things, right? Anyways, back to Lomachenko and this franchise designation. Don't be surprised if other people get this designation as well. I've been waiting for Deontay Wilder to get that designation. I don't know who the hell would be second in line for the WBC. I don't really care. It's bad for the sport. It really is. It just makes things even more confusing than they already were. This is why I'm going to keep imploring the audience to just use transnational. It's a lot of people give the Ring flack, and again, their rankings are good, so I'm not saying don't use them, but transnational to me has to be put on a pedestal because it's made up of a bunch of independent guys, people who are not attached to sanctioning bodies, promoters, managers, etc. It's just independent conversation. It's a lot of bright guys are on there. Obviously, Springs Toledo. Springs Toledo is one of the guys who helps run it. Cliff Rold is one of the guys who helps run it. Those are bright guys, well-known guys, contributed a lot to the sport. Springs Toledo has consistently been one of the best boxing writers for years and years, written a ton of great books. I don't think his integrity is questioned. I'd hope that mine isn't, but I'm not running things. I'm a part of the board. I'm not a part of the upper echelon. But that's my point, is we should be focusing, we should be turning our attention to something like transnational and giving weight to that, saying who ranks where, who ranks this, instead of saying, hey, well, the WBO has this guy ranked number 1 and number 2, when we all know these are political appointments. And don't, anybody who's followed the game long enough, again, anybody who listens to this show with Raspani, Einreinhofer, Goodpastor, guys who have been following the sport for decades, recognize that these are political maneuvers. It's no coincidence that the WBO has had every WBO title holder for welterweight since 2009, since Miguel Cotto beat Michael Jennings for that vacant belt. Every single guy who has held that title has been under Top Rank's banner in some capacity. The only time that it kind of changed hands was when Floyd Mayweather Jr. won it, when he beat Manny Pacquiao. But Floyd Mayweather used to be under Top Ranks as well. Of course, there was some bad blood there, so it's a different story. But it just doesn't happen by pure coincidence that one promoter happens to have a continuous stream of WBO champions for over a decade. It just that shit just doesn't fall into your lap. And the WBO is the same way with the Europeans. The WBA is, WBC with Al Heyman and Mexicans, and the WBO with Europeans, and WBA with Eddie Hearn. Just pay close attention. It's worth giving less weight, in fact, no weight, to these alphabet soup organizations. But of course, we need the fighters to get on board as well. We really do, because it's until they start saying no, it's just going to continue. And, we just need to do what we can until somebody comes along and breaks the wheel. We just need to find new solutions and keep pushing these guys and put pressure on them and trying to get it to the best sport possible. Anyways, with that, Devin Haney is now the WBC full titleist. Again, whatever the hell that means. Unfortunately, he's probably being mailed his title, and his, the best name on his resume is Abdullayev. It's not his fault. Again, it's not worth blaming Lomachenko or Devin Haney for this because it wasn't their decision. I'm sure Devin Haney is upset that he didn't, earn it in the ring. And so, we just have to, I guess, again, turn our attention to the WBC and make them feel unwelcome. But because of the WBC, I guess they had some convention in Cancun, Mexico. They've also ordered a few fights. I guess Gary Russell Jr. is going to fight Tug. I'm not going to say his full first name. I know his nickname is Tug Niambiar. Who was an Olympian, I believe. He's had a pretty solid pro career so far. He seems a bit green at this point to be fighting somebody like Gary Russell Jr., but he is a good fighter. He's from Mongolia. He's out of that Soviet school of boxing where he's technically sound. In fact, he kind of fights like a guy who I'm going to talk about later in Yuri Arbachakov, where he's got a good base. Technically, he's good. He's a good hitter. Good accuracy. Pretty good fighter. It seems like he's not quite at that level yet. And of course, this is not the fight any of us wanted. I mean, Tug is a good fighter. He's a bad little dude. But Russell Jr. should be fighting Leo Santa Cruz. I mean, the fact that fight has not come off and may never come off is a travesty. And it's one of the many reasons why we need to ignore the alphabet soup organizations. Because the fact that you can hold an alphabet trinket and do like Leo Santa Cruz has done is, the dude is, what is he, a 3-division titleist apparently, 118, 122, and 126, and then I think he's now targeting something at 130, and he's beaten who? He beat Carl Frampton in the rematch. He beat Abner Mares, who's good. It's not quite it's about on the Adrian Broner level because, Adrian Broner didn't even beat somebody in Adrian Broner's prime. He was at 135, but even he didn't beat anybody as good as Carl Frampton in his weight class. So at least Leo Santa Cruz has that to his credit. But then again, Adrian Broner is obviously taking on tougher opposition all around. But that's the thing is both of them are connected to Al Heyman. Both have gotten, a nice little pat on the butt politically by the WBA. And I believe that's what Leo Santa Cruz is now targeting. But this is the point, is that there are too many alphabet soup titles, and this sort of avoidance can go on. I mean, think of the sheer number of fights that we don't get because of the alphabet soup organizations. I mean, it's mind-boggling, and that enough should piss people off enough to want reform in the sport. I mean, if we don't ever get Russell Jr. versus Leo Santa Cruz, what a big miss, right? I mean, it's a travesty that it wouldn't have happened because we're talking about two guys who are arguably the best at 126, and we could have had a new line, and they just never got around to it, even though they were politically aligned. It just doesn't make any sense. Carl Frampton, the third fight should have been made as well with Leo Santa Cruz. But no, look at this. I mean, and there are tons of other guys who've weight hopped and trinket grabbed, and we've missed the very best fights because of it. I mean, Gervonta Davis just jumped up from 130. He was number 2 in the division for a year and a half, something like that. And he never fought Miguel Berchelt, who was number 1. Shouldn't there be a little I don't want to say outraged, but shouldn't people be upset about that sort of stuff? I mean, it's just constant. It's constantly happening, and then we finally get happy when somebody throws us a bone, and we finally get a good one. And to the credit of boxing, we have had a number of good fights. It's a rarity to have this many fights in a row that are this good. But again, it's not all number one, number two guys fighting one another. So I think that needs to be stressed too. Anyways, this is a good fight. It's not a great fight. It's not what we want. We'll see how it plays out. Anyways, what is also announced is Chris Eubank Jr. is fighting Matvey Korobov. And I think this is a damn interesting fight. To me, Chris Eubank Jr. is not as good as Charlo. So to me, and I think to many of you, Korobov has a pretty damn good shot at winning this. And if Korobov does win, I think a lot of us are going to scratch our head and say, why did you even bother taking that fight? I mean, Chris Eubank Jr., he's not a great fighter, but he's got a big name. He sells well. And from his social media profiles, he seems to be doing pretty well financially. But, yeah, I mean, it just seems kind of like a bad move. And, maybe Matt Korobov is a bit more faded. Maybe he's, maybe Chris Eubank Jr. does get the win, but it seems like a really tough styles matchup for Chris Eubank Jr. and something that if you were his manager, is this something you would direct him towards? I don't think so. I don't know a lot of guys who would want to go in the direction of Matt Korobov because he's a good southpaw with good accuracy. I mean, he's a southpaw first off, but he's a good southpaw. I mean, we saw what he was able to do against Charlo. I mean, the guy is not a joke. I mean, and had he stayed active, this whole time, he might have been a top 10 guy for, consecutive years. He might be a top 10 guy to this day. But it's just his inactivity which has killed him. But he's shown that he still has something left. But he is, 35, 36 now? So, there is that. And again, I don't expect him to get old overnight. He does seem more motivated, especially with his performance against Charlo. But I don't know. I'm just not, I don't think this is a good move by Chris Eubank Jr. at this moment. He seems like he'd probably be better off targeting somebody else. But on the flip side, I'm not really a Eubank Jr. fan, so if he loses this, I'm not going to cry one bit. It just doesn't bother me. And plus, even if it seems like a bad managerial move, good guys should be fighting good guys. So this doesn't bug me at all. I mean, Eubank Jr. is not at the top of his division. Korobov is a damn good fighter. He's worthy of a solid payday right now. So again, it's not a bad matchup. It just seems a little bad from a manager standpoint, but a good fight in terms of styles. And I'm hoping that Korobov comes away with a win there, and I'm actually going to pick him to get the win too. Anyways, what other news is there? I mean, there's not a whole lot going on. Obviously got the Tyson Fury WWE thing, right? You got a few other things materializing. We got Josh Taylor versus Regis Prograis on the weekend. We've got David Price versus Derek Chisora. I'm not going to cover those right now. What I will say is we should be doing another writer's prediction article for The Grueling Truth. If you're a writer and you're interested in participating, all we do is we round up a bunch of writers, get their opinions, put it in an article, and post it, and it always does big numbers. And I'm thankful for everybody who participates as well. But, we should have that up pretty soon. We're going to have a pound-for-pound punchers list on The Grueling Truth pretty soon, too, and that is included. If you've already been on the website, we already have a pound-for-pound defense list, which is worth checking out as well, because just about nobody does that. I don't know anybody who has a pound-for-pound defense list, but we're always willing to do different things over The Grueling Truth. Anyways, yesterday was not only the anniversary of Harry Grebb's death. Harry Greb, in my mind, was clearly the greatest middleweight of all time. Some people may not agree because there's not much film on him, but his resume speaks volumes. I mean, guys like Marvin Hagler and Carlos Monzon, their resumes just they don't touch Harry Greb's. I mean, Greb just fought so many more Hall of Famers. He fought not only that, when he was middleweight champion, he was whipping Hall of Famers at 175. He was beating contenders at heavyweight. Just a different breed of man. And so in my mind, he was clearly the greatest of all time. And actually, I wrote a piece about it too in Quora, if you want to check that out. Just go to the website and type in who's the greatest middleweight of all time. My answer should come up number one. And I give an in-depth analysis there. There's a lot of statistical data included in that. Anyways, what it also represented was the birth of Yuri Arbachakov. And Arbachakov is one of my favorite fighters, one of my favorite little men, flyweight especially, of all time. And, it was just kind of a random thing that the first website that I worked for, I was just, I was just kind of trying to pick a guy at random, like somebody who would be interesting to write about, somebody who other people don't talk about. And Arbachakov somehow got noticed by me. I picked it up and I wrote about him. I ended up watching his career from front to back, studying him a little bit, and now he's on the ballot for the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but unfortunately he's probably not going to get in. And if he does get in, it's going to be on a slow year. And I'm not saying that he is a shoo-in. There aren't many shoo-ins, in my opinion, for the Hall of Fame. This year coming up, there's some pretty obvious choices. But what I'm saying is, Arbachakov is, I'm not calling him a bona fide Hall of Famer, and therefore he probably doesn't deserve to be in a Hall of Fame. I mean, you should know if a guy deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and you can tell that a lot of these people don't believe that a lot of these guys should be in the Hall of Fame because a lot of these guys are just out picking their favorites. But Arbachakov is certainly worthy of at least a ballot mention. This was a guy who, less than 6 months after the Soviet Union collapsed, won a world championship. And I'm not talking an alphabet title. He won the world's flyweight championship less than 6 months after the Soviet Union fell. I think Soviet Union fell in December 1926, 1991, and Arbachakov won his first championship in June 23rd, 1992, I believe it was. I believe that's right. And, Arbachakov was a standout amateur. I mean, he wasn't the greatest amateur the Soviets ever had at the division. In fact, he missed. Arbachakov was not chosen as the representative for some of the big fights in the Olympics and whatnot. But he was a standout amateur. He was very good, and he turned out to be an excellent pro. He went over to Japan as part of the Perestroika program, had some immigrants over there. One of the teammates for one of the Olympics teams invited him over there. They fought on these bills together in Japan. It's a pretty cool thing that a lot of people don't talk about, even though we've had this large influx of former Soviet, guys from former Soviet countries coming here and doing quite well. And I think in light of the Artur Beterbiev Alexander Gvozdyk fight, it's worth noting how, historically significant Arbachakov was, because not only was it significant that he was the first after the Soviet Union collapsed to win a world title, but if I'm not mistaken, he was the first Russian-born fighter to ever win a world championship. And it's guys like Kostya, who I was a big fan of. Kostya gets a ton of play. I mean, and deservedly so. He was excellent, standout amateur, technically sharp, powerful, etc. But Arbachakov was the first. And I think that does say something historically. I mean, we don't only include guys in the Hall of Fame just because of their talent. It's not the Hall of Talent, it is the Hall of Fame. And I just think it's worth noting that Arbachakov was the first. And if you look at his style, and I really encourage everybody to go watch some of his film, all of it if you can. I do think that his fights are good enough. All of them are good enough to keep you intrigued. He was a bit like Costa Tszyu, right? He was a really good right-hand puncher, but he was a boxer puncher, but more of a boxer. He moved his feet well. He was real accurate, great jab, good defense. Again, pinpoint accuracy, had a good chin, good work rate, obviously good stamina. I mean, in doing so, he beat two former lineal champions, which I think is a significant feat in itself. And one of those lineal champions, I'm not sure I can get this right, but in Shate Sasekul, he was the guy who lost his flyweight championship to Manny Pacquiao. So that he beat him and then he lost to him in the rematch, and this was after injuries and whatnot. And he also beat, let me try this one on for side, but Muang Chai Kitakasam, who was also a lineal championship, and that's the guy who Yuri Arbachakov won him from. Both of those guys were damn good fighters, and in fact, I think it's worth checking out Matt McGrain's best flyweights of all time, because you have some of these guys included on there, and Yuri Arbachakov, I think, is getting his deserved credit and being highly placed by Matt McGrain, because Arbachakov was a little badass. I mean, stylistically, he was beautiful to watch. You can talk about the power and whatnot, but he outboxed these guys. These weren't typically quick stoppages. He wasn't going in there and overpowering guys. He was using his skill, and just patient with the knockout, and he generally got the knockouts. And in doing so, his opposition was not as bad as some other guys you would see at 112. Because it's hard for people to follow these sorts of guys because there's a lack of interest among the small men, and I think it makes sense why there is. And I'm not saying it's because these guys are necessarily lesser, but I think there's more of an appeal towards the bigger guys. There's more knockouts, more drama, et cetera, et cetera. But Arbachakov is worth your time. I mean, this guy had 9 defenses of his flyweight championship. That's a high total. I think it's one of the higher totals in the division all time. I can't remember quite where I placed it, because I think I crunched the numbers a long time ago, but I think it's third or fourth. I can't quite remember. I'll have to go back, so don't quote me on that. But this is a guy who was fantastic at what he did, had good opposition. Again, I think Matt McGrain rightfully recognizes how good Arbachakov was and puts him highly on the list. And I would say as well is that when you look at him in comparison to somebody like Mark Too Sharp Johnson, who gets a lot of credit, and this is, I guess if I want to take a step back, Mark Too Sharp Johnson gets a lot of credit for being a talented guy, and he certainly was, but he really didn't do much at 112. Yeah, he won an alphabet trinket, but I don't think he beat anybody in the top 5 ever. I mean, he wasn't there for a long time, but what you see is a lot of people place Mark Too Sharp Johnson highly at 112, and it's got to be on talent because, again, his resume is lacking. He's not on the level of Arbachakov, and I would extend this out because I've talked about this before. I wrote an article about how there are too many weight divisions in boxing, and I want to lay this out because I do think this sort of ties in what I've been saying the whole night. And at the time Arbachakov fought in the early to mid-90s, 112 and 108 were divisions. Okay, 105 was also a division. Strawweight was also a division, but it wasn't recognized as being a real division until 97, 98, when Rosendo Alvarez gave Ricardo Lopez all he could handle. I mean, nobody thought the division was worth a crap. And what you have because of all of this is how I'm tying this all in is and this is my take on too many belts and too many divisions. If 105 was never created and 108 was never created, again, I don't like 108 either. I don't like 105. The old timers had little trouble competing. Jimmy Wild was knocking guys out at barely 100 pounds, sometimes less. And that was a sign of his greatness. And of course, it is a little bit different nowadays because these guys, are taking weight cutting to the extreme measures, and so they're weighing in much better. But I would say even with Ricardo Lopez, it did not matter much because Ricardo Lopez's first fight at 108 was the rematch with Rosendo Alvarez, and he weighed 103 in that fight. And did it really look like 5 pounds made much of a difference? No, it didn't. Lopez was better in the rematch than he was in the first fight. So again, I just think that they're all needless. And we need to get to a point where we streamline the classes. We need to have hard scientific data to tell us, hey, this is how many weight classes we should have, how big a weight difference there should be in between these, based on percentage and all this other stuff. But we don't need alphabet soup organizations creating these arbitrary classes all in an effort to milk guys of more sanctioning fees. It's nonsense. And how this all ties in, again, is if 105 and 108 did not exist during Arbachakov's time, during Lopez's time, Rosendo Alvarez's, you look at the landscape, and there was Arbachakov, Mark Too Sharp Johnson, Michael Carbajal, Humberto Gonzalez, what's his name? Muyu. Who's the guy who upset Humberto Gonzalez? I think it was upset of the year in like 95 or something. Maybe I'm mistaken the year there. But again, Ricardo Lopez. So you would have had all these guys competing alongside one another. And we're talking about 4 guys who are in the Hall of Fame and 1 who is on the ballot. That's Arbachakov. So Gonzalez, Hall of Famer. Carbajal, Hall of Famer. Lopez, Hall of Famer. Muyu, Hall of Famer. And again, Arbachakov, who is on the ballot. Right? So you would have had all these guys competing against one another, and at least we would have had some fights. I mean, maybe we don't get all of these guys fighting one another, but we get a lot more than we did. All we really had was Carbajal and Gonzalez, and the guy who upset Gonzalez. I can't remember his name right now, Sarajatong or something like that. Sorry for butchering it. But you would have had all these guys competing alongside one another, and it would have been a potential flyweight golden era. But instead, what are we stuck with? What do we have now? We have Ricardo Lopez pounding out a ton of defenses against less than stellar opposition. We got Arbachakov fighting good, not great competition. We have Gonzalez and Carbajal with a great trilogy, and that's it. I mean, to me, it's nonsense. And again, this sort of stuff should be one of the reasons that we should all be pretty upset by the way things have happened. And this is a big reason why voting guys into the Hall of Fame has become such a tough endeavor so many times, because you don't know. I mean, Ricardo Lopez did not fight. Listen, I know he's a hero to some people, but he didn't fight any great fighters. It's not up for debate. Rosendo Alvarez was not a great fighter. Nobody that Lopez fought was a great fighter. And it's the same thing with Arbachakov. Nobody he fought was a great fighter either. So I'm applying this to everybody. So we didn't have all the answers we would have liked to be answered, or we didn't have all the questions we would have liked to have been answered during that era and during today's era. I mean, how many guys are we missing because of all this? Think about it. I mean, make a list. Google it. Google the biggest fights that we've ever missed, And a lot of them are in the modern era. Yeah, sure, you get a few in the historical era, right? Like, Jake LaMotta never fought Rocky Graziano. I think part of that was because they're friends. But that, I mean, we never had Ken Norton versus Joe Frazier. Yeah, they were friends, right? All these guys were friends. Those misses aren't that historically significant, in my opinion. LaMotta, to me, was clearly greater than Graziano. Frazier beat a closer to Prime Ali than Norton did. So, again, to me, there are still levels when we deal with that stuff. But look at some of the modern-day stuff. I mean, I just laid out a perfect example for all of you. But apply that to Kostya Tszyu, who I brought up earlier. If he has to choose between 135 and 147... does he go down and, hang with Mosley? And does he hang with Mosley at 135? Or does he move up to 147 and fight with guys like Trinidad and De La Hoya and these other guys? I mean, hell, we missed Kostya Tszyu versus Oscar De La Hoya partly because of the addition of weight classes. We missed... look at the fights, and I don't know the context of this, but what about Inoue? I mean, he started at 108, went to 112, or skipped over 112, went to 115, or no, went to 112 and then skipped over 115 and went to 118. He didn't fight Donnie Nietes on the way up. He didn't fight Kazuto Ioka. He didn't fight Estrada, Roman Gonzalez. He didn't fight Rungvisai. And again, I'm not getting accusatory and saying he ducked anybody, and maybe they ducked him. Some of them ducked him. I don't know. There's a lot of context. There's a lot of nuance that needs to be had. But what I'm saying is the context, it's all unfortunate. I mean, these guys should be fighting one another. We should not be asking these questions like, well, what if? What if Inoue had fought Donnie Nietes at 112 or Ioka at 112 or... Rungvisai at 115. And just use that as an example. I mean, if 115 didn't exist and we only had bantamweight, well, hell, you think bantamweight is good now. What if it had Rungvisai and Estrada in it? Yeah, and Nietes, I mean, it's clear that it would be significantly stronger. And that's the way it is with all these weight classes. If you cut some of the fat off, if you trim the fat of some of these junior super divisions, all of these divisions would be stronger. I mean, Josh Taylor and Prograis, they'd be welterweights. I mean, all you got to do is go down the line, look at the rankings, pull up Transnational's page, go to the top 10s, eliminate the junior / super classes, and include the people in the divisions right below. So, cut out super middleweight and include them in light heavyweight. Cut out 154, include them in 160. Cut out 140, put them in 147. And look at how much deeper the divisions get. And I know some people are like, oh, well, the weight divisions, they're for weight cutting purposes and it's for safety. Listen, it's bullshit. Because the alphabet soup organizations did not create these weight classes based on some hard scientific data that was peer reviewed in a prestigious journal. It didn't fucking happen. They did it for sanctioning fees. Safety is just a ploy that they've always put out there, as a means to cover their asses and to make themselves look progressive. They didn't ask scientists for this shit. Okay. If these guys really wanted to enhance the sport, there's plenty of safety measures they could have implemented, but it's about money. That's what it's about. So I'm going to leave you on that. Hopefully we can get to a point where the sport gets serious reformation. I'm talking about top bottom, not this, let's eliminate 2 alphabet soup organizations and bring it down to 2 and have things the way they are. That's not going to do. I mean, even if you had one, even if you just had the WBC or the WBA, boxing is going to be a bullshit run place. Because, again, it's still politics. These guys are still palm greasers. So it's not worth that. You have to have an ethical governing body with less weight classes, 1 champion per, and making sure that these guys defend their titles against stiff opposition in a timely fashion. And this is what I've proposed before. You have a worldwide organization, I don't know, like FIFA or something, I don't know, but something that works, that's worldwide, and you have one champion per division, right? You have less divisions, and the champion. See, this is a rebuttal I get sometimes. They're like, oh well, if you only have one champion, well, if you only have one champion, well, this guy's never going to get a shot. No, you are. All you do is have a revolving door of challengers. If you say, hey, the champion has to fight his number one contender every year, and then his second defense can be against, let's say, a top 5 guy. If he wants to take a third defense, which he should, in my opinion, because guys should be more active. Champions especially should be, because they need to be in the spotlight more. I mean, boxing really suffers because these guys are fighting 2 times a year, and so you forget about them for, the majority of the year. I mean, like, you hear snippets here and there on Boxing Scene and other news places, but you put them out of your mind by and large for a large portion of the year, and it's not a good way to build brands. Anyways, you fight the number one guy once every year. Let's say you fight a top 5 guy you're choosing for your second defense, and then the third defense, again, I think it could be more of a showcase fight. That way you maintain some of what makes boxing unique, right? The Chuck Wepner stuff where, like the underdog can win it all, right? Let's say you can fight a top 30 guy or top 20 guy, something like that. And I'm fine with that. And I think a lot of people would be fine with that. But that's the thing, is if you're a champion, you beat the number one guy, well, it cycles in a new guy. Well, you beat a guy in the top 5. Well, you've just eliminated 2 guys from the top 5 in 1 year's time. So you're just, again, it's a revolving door of guys, and the best are getting the shots, and that's who should be getting the fights. I don't care if the number 8 guy never gets a shot if he just doesn't prove himself worthy of it. That doesn't bug me. Only the best guys, again, minus that unique defense, if they were to implement some sort of rule like that, should get the shot. Anyways, as always, brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation, brought to you by betnow.eu. That's right. Click on the banner, sign up using Truth50 as your promo code. You get something when you go to bet. And, go bet on the Pro Gray Josh Taylor fight coming up. Help us out a little bit. Go to Seat Giant, buy some boxing tickets. Help us out a little bit. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, just me, or you'd like me to bring on a specific guest to chit-chat with, I'd be perfectly happy to do so. So with that, I'm your host, Jeremiah Preisser. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak. Have a good night.